Hi, and welcome to Experience Points by University XP. On Experience Points, we explore different ways we can learn from games. I'm your host, Dave Eng from Games-Based Learning by University XP. Find out more by going to universityxp.com. On today's episode, we'll learn from Ryan Schaaf. Today's guest is Dr. Ryan L. Schaaf, an associate professor of educational technology at Notre Dame of Maryland University and faculty at Johns Hopkins University. He was named the 2023 Outstanding Higher Education Award winner by the Maryland Society of Educational Technology. Ryan is also an award-winning author of 7 books, including Reinventing Learning for the Always On Generation. His research spans online learning, games-based learning, and educational reform. Outside of academia, Ryan stays active as a K-12 substitute teacher, workshop facilitator, and consultant. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm looking forward to having our chat about digital game-based learning and today's learners.
Great, great. I'm really glad for that. I'm going to jump into the first question here because I'd like to know a little bit more about your own personal journey and background. So, can you take some time to brief me and the audience on your journey into educational technology and how your experiences have helped shape your passion for digital games-based learning?
So I've always been a gamer. My mother started me off with the Atari 2600, playing Frogger and Combat and Asteroids. This was back in, oh my goodness, the early 1980s. As I
Mhm.
got older, I then had a Nintendo, a Super Nintendo, a PlayStation, a PC, and I've always loved the game. So then I decided I wanted to become a K through 12 educator. As I taught my students, I had a natural affinity for using computers and sharing my love of them. We started completing like web quests together and creating multimedia projects and exploring the web. But what truly captured my interest and passion was gaming. I had a student named Farhan. He was brand new to the United States. He didn't speak English. At that time, language acquisition, was all about immersion. They would just learn over time. So I would have lessons with him, then give him centers where we'd actually go around to stations and doing learning activities. His favorite center by far was the computer station because it had some great digital learning games on it. And these games were math games and science games, literacy games. So he was learning by doing. And the other kids gravitated to him and the games and assisted him through his lessons. Fast forward 20 years into the future, and that is a blueprint to modern learning. You have collaboration, you have using technology to amplify our teaching and learning efforts, and an introduction to self-directed learning. My
Mhm.
county, when I was a K through 12 teacher, was pretty progressive and adopted a philosophy of heavy technology integration. This was way back in 2006.
Mhm.
But technology was used in a meaningful, purposeful way, not just as a digital babysitter. During this time, I graduated from Johns Hopkins with my master's in educational technology and leadership. The truly amazing tool that stuck out the most were the digital learning games.
Mhm.
This is when everyone was developing game content on, Adobe Flash. I used games and crafted instructional experiences around them. Although I still taught the curriculum, I infused gaming into my teacher toolkit,
Mhm.
and I absolutely loved it.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that background. I want to know, though, your student, it's Farhan,
Yes,
Farhakn.
yes.
Uh, uh, I don't know if it's on topic, but I remember one of the very first, I think you would call them serious games now, but
Hmm.
a lot of people remember Oregon Trail. But one of my first games, I would say, would be Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing. Do you remember this game?
I do.
You do. Okay. Then, do you remember the game called Typing of the Dead?
I do not. We used to use type to learn.
Uh-huh.
And one called Dance Mat Typing, which is still there, and it
Mhm.
was produced by the BBC. And
Okay.
it has all these fascinating English accents, and the
Mhm.
kids absolutely they were getting their tutorial, their typing lessons in it, but they loved the voices because they spoke with such heavy British accents and terminology. So
Yeah.
it was hysterical where the kids would laugh and they didn't understand what they were saying, but
Mhm.
they just loved the immersion and they actually loved, again, learning by doing. through their
Right.
typing tutorials.
And
It was also a site that kept track of data too in
I
the
see.
early days. Yeah.
Mhm. I mean, I know that we're talking about digital games-based learning, but I think that this story is really impactful because it really addresses like a lot of the intrinsic motivation. Part of the reason why Farhan wanted to keep playing was because the actual experience was fun and intrinsically motivating. Like now I have to type as part of my, like regular day job every single day, but I learn how to type at least in, like junior high and high school through games like Mavis Beacon teaches typing and typing of the dead. So I think that your story specifically about that intrinsic motivation and why players are playing and the additional like positive educational benefits is really inspiring. So thanks for sharing, Ryan.
Yep. And it's been almost 20 years, so I think I think the time then disclosing is okay.
Great. Well, I now that we've gotten a little bit of background on your personal journey, I want to talk more about the digital impact of games-based learning. So, how do you see specifically digital games-based learning transforming education, particularly for the quote unquote always on generation? Because I think that's a really meaningful summary of a generation.
Yeah, and I wish I could take total credit for that coming up with that term. That was it Shirley Turkle, I think it was.
Mhm,
And she's an amazing she really she's a researcher that really explored like technology and psychology and kind of how they merge together.
mhm,
So my co-authors and I kind of took that term and ran with it because we just thought it was great and it really did explain or at least characterize the generation. I'm reading one right now about
mhm,
a psychologist named Gene when just talking about this current generation of child that is the ones born pretty much after 2013. So these
mhm,
are the kids that are 10, 13 and younger, and they're growing up. That she almost calls them polars because they're growing up in a really polarizing kind of political atmosphere and just a lot, just how hot topic everything is now. But it's also talking about just um, how technology has almost completely become almost a second reality to them.
mhm, mhm,
We call it in reinventing learning the always on generation. We call that almost they live in a transfluent type of experience, both digital and real world
mhm,
types of identities to where they're almost completely merged and they're not separate. So, kind of getting back to your question, how do you see digital game-based learning like transforming for this generation? So, outside of school, most K through 12 students, they game in some fashion.
mhm,
They play, Fortnite, they do Minecraft, Roblox, Apex. It's what my 17-year-old's playing right now. There's Call
mhm,
of Duty
mhm,
and pretty much anything from EA Sports. That's my youngest son, Ben. He's 11. He's my kid that I would call one of the polar kids.
mhm,
It's what he's playing now. He does anything from football to basketball. So they gravitate to the competition between, the different players, the games, and all the other all the other nuances that really make games immersive, exciting, and engaging.
mhm,
So the always on generation, they get to choose what games to play. They get to cultivate next generation skills like problem solving, collaboration, data analysis, critical thinking, and learning through iteration. And then there are traditional schools with traditional learning. When they enter the classroom, they lose their choice and their voice. They start to lose their agency. Where when they're playing games, they get to really be really the active participant in their experience and their learning. They get to choose the games they want to play. They get to choose the skills that they want to cultivate.
mhm,
But when we go to schools, a lot of times, when students are learning, they lose a lot of their choice. They
mhm,
lose a lot of their agency. And that's where I really think one of the biggest ways that digital game-based learning can kind of transform education
mhm,
is by kind of changing that type of learning experience because, the player they get to make a lot of choices.
mhm,
They get to practice a lot of agency.
mhm,
They get, and if you think about traditional learning, a lot of times the teacher is the person that delivers the content. They're what was it Kurt Squire calls it content dispensers,
Hmm.
where educators become just content dispensers. But in this case, when it comes to digital game-based learning, it's really kind of like it's almost like a three-way dance when it comes to learning.
Hmm.
It's the learner, it's the teacher, and it's the game that they're experiencing. And that really does help to change the aspect of teaching. It really helps them to become a facilitator
Hmm.
instead of just again, that content dispenser.
Right.
And that really does kind of change the role of an educator.
Hmm.
I feel like, many kids are waiting for the video game version of school
Hmm.
because it will be tailored to what they want education to look like. They
Right.
want it to be immersive. They want it to be tailored to their identities and their needs. They want to receive that instant feedback for their efforts without significant consequences if they make mistakes. They
Hmm.
can learn as they grow. Digital games provide the always-on generation with the first taste of artificial intelligence
Hmm.
and digital assistants and virtual environments.
Hmm.
A lot of kids are learning that, wow, computers actually can make some choices,
Hmm.
and then it starts to get them interested in how do they make these choices. That a lot of them are pre-programmed, and now that we actually have intelligence built in, they discover that computers can learn in some aspects.
Hmm.
So, and I find that a well-designed digital game provides an amazing learning experience.
Hmm.
While educators can assume, again, that role of a facilitator instead of a content dispenser,
Hmm.
all while collecting safe formative assessment data mapped to learning goals.
Hmm.
That can be a blueprint for success. And to really reach into learning science and theory, one of the first learning strategies kids use during childhood development is play. In kindergarten, they play a lot and it is enriching and powerful. But by high school, they aren't playing in school anymore. Play is seen as a waste of time.
Hmm.
It shouldn't be that way.
Great, thanks, Ryan. I also want to just confirm for our audience when you're talking about specifically the always on generation, you cited 2013 as a date of birth. Would this be also classified as Generation Alpha?
Yeah, and again, it depends on how you characterize. I'm really talking about the when it comes to I use the terms digital generations or
Hmm.
the always on generation.
Hmm.
I'm really talking about the generations. So there's multiple generations that were really born in the internet era.
Hmm.
This is in the last 20 some years. And now, of course, we're teaching, mostly two generations in K through 12. We
Hmm.
have those. Was it X? No. X is mine. I'm too old. We have the two we have this generation alpha.
Hmm.
We have, or what is termed as polars. We also have the ones that came right before them. So we have and that's why a lot of times in my books now I call them generations because there's so
Hmm.
many and
I
there's
see.
a few. But where we used to have events and we used to have technology to some point would kind of stratify these different generations. Now we have technology in this evolution to where the generation gaps are just shrinking,
Hmm.
considerably to where if we think of a generation, that might be 20 or 30 years. Now it's 5 to 10 years. Soon,
Hmm.
it's going to be really interesting how they characterize different generations.
Right.
So just to kind of clarify, when I
Hmm.
say always on generation, it's really I would have to say the last 15 years, since
Okay.
really kind of like what you would say is like the expanse of smartphones
Hmm.
and tablets and laptops.
Hmm.
But when it comes to the digital generation, we do have, people now in the workforce that were, the start of the digital generation. So,
Right. And I think that you brought it up before specifically because like we're kind of getting that um like I would even term it a like generation inflation in that the time between generations is getting smaller and smaller because I was talking about this with some of my colleagues like a lot of the children or kids today in K through 12 and like some early young adults that are going to be starting their careers in higher education are ones where the internet has always been present. There's always been social media. There's always been, for part of the younger generations, there's always been some sort of like AI assistant, like starting with Siri and now with generative AI. And I feel like at least some of the younger generations are those where this technology, this level of technology and access has always been present. Whereas for me, I'm a millennial. I don't know what generation you identify as, Ryan, but like for me, I grew up as like, oh, there was a time in my life when I did not have internet. And then there was a time in my life when internet was, like somewhat accessible. And then there was a time in my life where it is always accessible. So I think the biggest change for me is that like for them, this has always been the case. But for me, it was like, I remember a time when we didn't have all of these things and we had to like, you know, search for like going back to like Encyclopedia Britannica and everything else. Whereas this current generation, like it is something that's always been present. It's always something that they've always had access to. And I think that's a really great avenue to approach with digital games-based learning.
Absolutely. And, just, let's go back to Mark Prensky and,
Mhm,
how he kind of introduced the term digital game based, or at least, he wrote a book about it and didn't actually use that term except I think for the actual title.
mhm,
And then he spent a whole book just kind of exploring, different experiences, different people that were exploring this new, possibility.
mhm,
And, he's the one who termed digital natives and digital immigrants, and,
mhm,
and it's funny, I think with our generation, we're kind of like, am I a native or am I an immigrant? I remember
mhm,
always having that, internet. I remember having the internet, but I also remember not having the internet.
mhm,
And it's funny now as we're arguing if we're considered immigrants or natives. Now we have the second, third, generations that have been these natives, like digital natives, almost like 2.0, 3.0, because
mhm,
now AI is going to come and just disrupt everything. It's just disruptive innovation. I think is really ingrained into this generation stratification, I guess is the best way to say it, or
mhm.
or or there's the shrinking of that time
Right.
between different generations and iterations. It's just it's interesting. I don't know if it's was it anthropology or media anthropology or digital anthropology or
Mhm,
sociology. I have no idea, but it's really cool to explore. And as an educator, it's really fun to engage with that and try and teach them because they almost teach as much to you as you do to them,
mhm.
which is it's inspiring.
Right. I know that we went a little bit off topic with the generational discussion, but I think it's entirely useful, Ryan. But I want to talk about the specific barriers and solutions because I think like you're preaching to the choir here with someone who's into games-based learning. Specifically, we're talking about digital games-based learning. But I also want to represent some of the questions of like the audience and the listeners overall. So I want to talk about barriers and solutions. So, according to you, Ryan, what do you think are the biggest barriers to implementing digital games-based learning in K through 12 and higher education? And how can educators and institutions overcome those barriers?
So that's like the million-dollar question, I think.
Mhm,
So there are many barriers to large-scale adoption of digital game-based learning. Right now, we have pockets. We have some researchers, we have some facilitators that are exploring it, and they're like, they're trying to, they, might create grants. They might do something to try and explore and build it up, but it really hasn't caught like significant traction. When I say that, it's not as maybe popular in the studies, although if you go, you'll see that a lot of studies, a lot of research are still going and exploring into digital gaming and learning.
mhm,
So that that is one definite positive aspect, but I feel like the barrier to that is just first schools and colleges have their set curriculums. And a game has to be aligned to what they must learn. So
mhm,
I'm not saying this is how it should be. I'm just expressing kind of like the reality of things.
mhm,
So that's one barrier. How does that improve? Is that I think with more partnerships between schools and learning game designers or learning game developers or companies
mhm,
to see what they truly need. And it's this has been like kind of like one of those like I think real struggles. You have the big names, you have Brain Pop,
mhm,
you have Minecraft, which now Microsoft, you have all of these these games that have learning potential, and now they're starting to onboard educators and learning designers, so this way they can actually take this amazing resource.
Mhm.
Because I almost consider games not just a tool, but also learning environments. They're taking these and trying to explore how can we teach with this?
Mhm.
What can we teach this, and what comes out of after they're done? What are these like, what are these like learning goals? What are what are the skills that are being developed? So I'd have to say you're starting to see a little bit of that as the solution is like kind of the partnerships have to happen.
Mhm. Mhm.
And of course now there's other hurdles that maybe that companies back when I was in K through 12 spaces a lot using digital games with my students all the time
Mhm.
is there's hurdles that they're dealing with right now. There's data privacy policies
Mhm.
that are absolutely I love what they're doing. They are protecting the privacy of our learners, our students that they have to have their identities protected. However, it does make an additional barrier for that integration because schools have to adopt tools that are compliant with these, and a lot of them are federal and state
Mhm.
regulations. They have to adhere to them.
Mhm.
So that's a potential barrier. And again, just I see a lot of I see a lot of learning game developers trying to navigate this space, and I cheer the efforts to protect the learners. I really do, but it does add that layer of complexity to the situation. A colleague that I kind of I spoken with in the past, and I know she does a lot of work with like science and outcomes. Is Lindsay Tropf. I can never pronounce her name quite
Mhm.
100% correct. She does Tyto online. It's Tyto online. She builds incredible games that teach really complex science,
Mhm.
and it's truly amazing. I know she sometimes gets funding, I think, through federal grants and maybe state-based grants. I don't even know how she gains grants, but I find it amazing that she's able to develop such amazing games that are immersive and incredible graphics too.
Mhm.
She can create that. And now I'm sure that this is one of the things that she's exploring is data privacy
Mhm.
between schools because one of her biggest clients are school districts. So again, it's just about kind of navigating that space.
Mhm.
Of course, there's cost. Schools are very when it comes to digital tools and resources, they do still spend money on hardware, but when it comes to software
Mhm.
and apps, they feel like that's usually the last thing that really gets money unless it's like a learning management system.
Mhm.
If you have the Canvas and the Bright Spaces, they'll put money there because of all the things it does. However, when it comes to something like a digital tool like a game, they're like, oh, it's money well spent, money not probably in gaming. So
Mhm.
it's also just the money and the funding. It's
Mhm.
hard to kind of get that, and like it's kind of like a sore spot, I think, for many people in this digital game based learning space.
Mhm.
You have the learning designers, the game developers that they need funding. And because these games, they're trying to give it either at a significant discount so K through 12 students don't suffer. But you also, at the end of the day, they're building a product and they also need to survive and
Mhm.
thrive.
Mhm.
So you have these types of barriers existing.
Right.
And there's also, of course, I think the biggest one for adoption is the teacher training and the development.
Mhm.
How do you teach learning using digital games? That is why, like, I write these books like Game On and Reinventing Learning for the Always On Generation. And the
Mhm.
current one I'm currently working on is the Learning Arcade.
Mhm.
I want to help educators and all the stakeholders see the potential of games for modern teaching, learning, and assessment.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it. I know we're a little bit tight on time here, but I want to make sure that the audience and the listeners get some like actionable items here from this particular episode. So if say I am a K through 12 educator and I want to get started with digital games-based learning, what's a good place for me to start, or what's like a first good action for me to take, or what's a book of yours that I should start out with?
So Game On right now. It's coming up on, I think was it? I wrote it in 2017, so it's getting
Hmm.
a little older.
Hmm.
But in that book, it has a lot of games that you can almost pick up and play almost instantly. But there are
Okay.
so many different um, you know, uh, gaming sources that students can still absolutely use. I know a
Hmm.
lot of them use Chromebooks, they use
Hmm.
laptops, they use some way to access them in school or some way to access them at home.
Hmm.
There are differently games that they can find and play.
Hmm.
So I suggest that they look at it like almost they look at like YouTube videos or
Hmm.
videos that are instructional. They as educators, they find them, they vet them, as in they find out if they're safe or not,
Hmm.
and then they kind of think about how can I use this in the instructional process.
Hmm.
Game On actually does that. It actually takes you through the here's ways to find games, here's ways to vet the games, here are some good questions to ask
Hmm.
about the, kind of adopting a game. Here's how you can actually use games during the lesson plan and the lesson implementation phases. And here's even how you can kind of use assessments with them.
I see.
So it kind of walks them through the entire kind of like the instructional process.
Mm.
But it also helps them with selecting and figuring out, if a game doesn't do something, how they can do it out in the real world. So, that's one aspect. One actionable takeaway that I'd suggest is just, finding games, playing it with your colleagues. If you have a team, I know I used to have teams of teachers. We used to find a game. We used to, preview it and then figure out how we were going to use it
Mm.
during the learning process for modern teaching, learning, and assessment practices.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. I think our educators who are listening are going to be able to get a lot out of those individual steps, and also make sure that they get a link to your book in the show description or notes. So, thanks for joining us today, Ryan. Where can people go to find out more about you online?
So there's ryanschaaf.com. It
Hmm.
shares all of my books, my presentations, and my free resources.
Hmm.
I'm on Facebook. You can look up Professor Ryan Schaaf, and that's Schaaf, and you can connect that way. I love LinkedIn. It's definitely probably one of my favorite go-to professional networks right now because it's just for the most part it's a lot of educators. I've been able to create such a nice like learning network with all of like-minded folks and individuals that we can share resources and ideas and presentations, all sorts of things. And of course, I have an Amazon Author Central page that you can always go to. And I'm working on something really exciting for digital game-based learning in K through 12 learning environments. I'm trying to work on this digital game, this learning game database that
Hmm.
has all these digital games that I'm curating and trying to provide for educators. But that is a big task that I'm still working on.
All right.
So I want to thank you, Dave, for having me today.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. I'll make sure that everyone gets links to that in the description or show notes. And hopefully, when you finish that resource, you'll be able to share it out with me so that I can share it out with everyone else and other educators and games-based learning practitioners I know. I hope you found this episode useful. If you'd like to learn more, then a great place to start is with my free course on gamification. You can sign up for it at universityxp.com/gamification. You can also get a full transcript of this episode, including links to references in the description or show notes. Thanks for joining us. Again, I'm your host, Dave Eng from Games Based Learning by University XP. On Experience Points, we explore different ways we can learn from games. If you like this episode, please consider commenting, sharing, and subscribing. Subscribing is absolutely free and ensures that you'll get the next episode of Experience Points delivered directly to you. I'd also love it if you took some time to rate the show. We live to lift others with learning, so if you found this episode useful, consider sharing it with someone who could also benefit. Also, make sure to visit University XP online at universityxp.com. University XP is also on Twitter at university_XP and on Facebook and LinkedIn as University XP. Also, feel free to email me anytime. My email address is dave at universityxp.com. Game on.